So you had Bob Jones here last night talking about customers, and he's back tonight to lead a panel discussion on people and organizational issues. You know, you heard Rich talk about team being the thing he looked at first, and then he looked at the business model. The team is, you know, I think statistics show that the failure rate for companies usually is people issue. It's not technology, it's not market, it's usually people issues. So Bob has put together a panel to talk about that and other things, and I will turn it over to Bob to take it from here.
Thank you. I think it's probably a good thing that there are fewer of you here tonight than there were last night, because when I opened the evening last night, you'll recall that I quoted a couple of founders who talked about how excruciatingly difficult it was to be an entrepreneur. And so part of my goal was to scare away the lightweights. It appears to have worked. So congratulations. I'm going to skip most of the preamble tonight because I really don't want to talk a whole lot tonight. You've got people who are more qualified than I, and I want you to be able to talk as well as them. So our agenda, I want to set the stage with a couple of things. First of all, talk a little bit about why this is on the curriculum for nuts and bolts. Tell you a little bit about who our panelists are and why their experience is relevant to this topic. Talk a little bit about your role tonight, because you are a part of this little colloquium. This is less a lecture and more like a gathering of people who have a common interest. Then we'll have the discussion. We'll pull together a couple of things I hope we've learned and call it a night. You'll remember last night that I talked about how disconcerting it was to me to figure out that an awful lot of smart, passionate, talented, hardworking people start companies which then fail. In fact, something like 90% of those companies fail, and I wanted to know why. And I sort of boiled it down. This is obviously a horrible oversimplification, but two things that will improve your chances of success, this is a reiteration of last night, are improving your skills in certain basic areas. Many of you have very deep domain expertise in particle physics, but your coursework just does not prepare you for the other aspects of running a business. And of course, item 2 was re-engineering your mindset, and by that we talked a little bit about how we adjust to and learn from failure, right? Because most new ventures do fail, and many people, particularly with pedigrees like the ones you have never really failed anything before. And they find it somewhere between disconcerting and crushing. Well, that's not going to help you persist and succeed as an entrepreneur. What will help is if you come to adjust your thinking, failure should be a learning event, not a fatal occurrence. You'll recall this from last night. And we said some of the basic skills you should have are, who's your customer? That was last night. How will you make money? That was Rich a few minutes ago. Organization and people issues. Legal issues. Selling and making presentations. Sales. Oh my God. Negotiating skills, understanding finances, raising capital. We said this is not accidentally the curriculum for this course you're part of, and this is where we are for tonight. Okay? So there's some method to the madness. So, who are these worthy individuals up front? Well, we have Sissi, who is CEO and co-founder at Metalmark Innovations, wears a number of other hats. She's a mentor with MIT's Venture Mentoring Service. If you've not run into MIT's VMS, you should. It's an awesome organization full of volunteers who charge you nothing and offer extraordinarily good advice The only requirement is that someone on the senior management team has to have some affiliation with MIT. Otherwise, we would be totally choked by the number of people who want really good free advice. Also, a volunteer mentor at Venture Cafe, where the beer flows freely. Catalyst at MIT's Deshpande Center, went to a couple of schools. And Sissi, you should take a moment and tell us a little bit about Metalmark innovations, please.
Well, thanks, Bob, for having me here. I was saying to Joe earlier that I took this class many years ago and learned a lot. It was my first ever experience in sort of an entrepreneurship-related or focused course, and took away a lot of great information. And of course, in my own journey, learned a lot too. So I've spent the last 20 years in the clean tech sector, wearing many hats. I've invested in this segment and been in startups, worked in business development, sales, and was very lucky to meet my co-founders who were doing their postdoc at Harvard. And so we launched Metalmark about 4 years ago. And Metalmark now is we are an advanced materials space company, but we have developed an air purification system. We're just getting ready to put it into the market. It is the world's first self-cleaning air purifier. And so think about not changing your HEPA filters once every 6 months, but instead once every 5 years. So it's a pretty long-term change and lowers a lot of the cost and maintenance related to air purification. So that is a very brief overview.
Thank you. And sharing the stage on keyboards and vocals, is Sebastien, who is the CEO at Acoustic Wells, Inc. Sebastien did a couple of gigs as a research intern at companies you've heard of, and then spent way too much time in school when he should have been learning to ride skateboards. He's got his master's, his doctorate, and a postdoc in aero, astro, and astroengineering from MIT. Picked up a couple more degrees from 2 different schools in France. Like I said, he should have been learning to play guitar, but went to school. And of interest, also spent some time as a volunteer in Texas teaching robotics and aeronautics to kids in underserved communities. So, Sebastien, if you would, tell us a little bit about Acoustic Wells.
Sure. So my background is probably like many of you here. I was a grad student at MIT, working on various research problem and projects in the industry and aerospace. I always knew I wanted to create a company dealing with that sector, which comes with many difficulties, dealing with heavy industry. And I was lucky enough to do my PhD on a very interesting topic, and I decided to create the company initially based on that idea. So what we do nowadays is we have an IoT system that we install mainly on oil fields in the US that allows us to basically remotely operate everything. We know exactly what's happening on the ground, and we can eliminate most of the leaks by controlling the system better. So in a time where the industry is changing and has to reinvent itself, it's a pleasure to work in this sector.
Thank you. So within reasonable limits, these two have walked the path that you're walking already. I've heard people say MIT eats its young, and I'm not sure that's true, but you've got a couple of founders here who have spent at least some time in affiliation with this institution. What stage are your businesses in? Tell me about how many employees you have and roughly where you are in terms of products in the market, capital raised, et cetera. Just quick flyover for that, please. Sissi.
We currently have 7 employees, hiring more, some more people coming on. But we actually have really leveraged contractors and consultants to expand our capabilities. And so it's more along the lines of 20 equivalent full-time people.
Great, thank you. Sebastien?
Yeah, so we just raised our seed round. We raised our pre-seed round right before COVID started, seed round just a couple months ago. There's close to 20 people. I think there's 17 of us. We're in the middle of hiring a lot, so the numbers are going to be updated quickly. Total of $10 million fundraise. Yeah, so 3-year-old company, effectively.
Okay, so Tommy, if you're listening, can you turn these two up? I think that I talk louder than they do. Okay, you guys know me from last night, so just a quick flyover. I published a book. I've started 4 healthcare companies. I took over as CEO of a company publicly traded in Hong Kong, which had lost money for a zillion years, requiring me to fire 75 people and turn the thing around. Had a couple of normal jobs, went to a couple of schools. I'm a working musician, and I spend a fair amount of time volunteering in homeless shelters. So that's the flyover. So let the games begin. First, your role tonight, since there are fewer of you than last night, and we're a little more of a dense pack than we were last night. I don't want you to sit there and act like you are an empty vessel into which we pour wisdom, because that's just not the case. All right? I'm going to ask them some questions and get out of the way and turn them loose, but you should as well. And there will be times, I think this evening, if this goes well, when I will toss out a situation or two that I found myself in and say, what should I have done? And see what you think. So be prepared, be engaged, you'll get more out of it. Fair enough? Some of our topics will be, how important is this thing anyway? Why are we even talking about it? We'll ask for some stories, times they've hired good people and made bad hires. What were the differences? How do you keep your staff focused? How do you keep them motivated? And every now and then people say, well, should we give stock options to the staff? Is that always appropriate? Oh, if you hire enough people, sooner or later, you will hire a weenie. That's a technical HR term. And either the job will have outgrown them or you will have just made a bad hire. How do you know? And how do you actually do it? And what's this thing, corporate culture? Is it ever reasonable to say we're like a family? So I'm going to leave these up here and ask the panel, since we are located in an educational facility that has the word Institute of Technology in its title, one would think that all you really need is elegant heuristics or a unique molecule or something along those lines to be a roaring success. So let me ask you, is that all it takes? Or is this topic, in fact, even remotely important?
Let you go
Yeah,
first.
I wish. No.
Yes,
Oh,
I queued that one up for you. Take it away.
No, and it's funny because if you started as an engineer here, you probably started with your specific idea, and things change a lot compared to if you compare your initial pitch, a while ago compared to what you're doing. And just going back on how important the team is in the hire, I'll just give a little background. So I have 3 co-founders, which I think is relatively unusual on the hire side. Typically, it's 2 or 3.
Let me stop you right there. That's really unusual. Why on earth would you have a total of 4 co-founders?
Because I think we complemented each other very well. Everyone had a very different personality or background or skill set, and I think that helped the company, that still helped the company a lot, but especially early on.
Let's say that this gentleman here, who's in fact pursuing his doctorate in physics, if I remember correctly, let's say he has 3 roommates and they want to start a company. Should they declare that all 4 of them are co-founders automatically? And why not?
It shouldn't be automatic. I think it's an unusual case, but I wouldn't exclude it. I think there are reasons, if your 3 roommates happen to be, whatever, one is a MBA, specialized in the field you want to do, and so on, then maybe, but not by default.
So if there are 4 people that have essentially the same skill set,
Yeah.
and you make all 4 of them co-founders, you're about to run into a buzzsaw.
And that's pretty common. I think that there's a lot of 3 engineers together or similar.
Of course, we've never seen a situation where people at MIT think that their roommates should be co-founders. This is purely a hypothetical question. All right, Sissi, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I also have 3 co-founders. However, I mentioned that Metalmark started about 4 years ago, but the company was incorporated before I joined. And so I came in with a business background, and my co-founders had the technical background. We also had an academic co-founder who's the professor of whose lab the original technology came out of. So it was that's the composition, and of course, things change over time. I think one of the issues with scientists is that you are very, not you personally, I just mean that generally people are very enamored with their own baby and can't let go. I'm really fortunate that my co-founders have been very flexible and been able to pivot with me over the last 4 years as we went through a lot of growing pains at Metalmark, and to realize that sometimes when you actually define the problem, the solution has to change with it, and with that, the technology as well. So I think generally a lot of teams get started because you have a common interest and you may have worked on a technology together, and that's how you get started. But the reality is the business has its own way of taking shape, and it really depends on the chemistry of the team ultimately. So definitely to Bob's point earlier, the team is important. It's important to also think about the division of equity at the beginning. There are different theories of how you would do that, but that sets a certain tone for your team over time, and could build different chemistry among the co-founders as well.
Well, Sissi, you said a minute ago that you've had a lot of growing pains over the years, and yet you are still, figuratively speaking, you're still standing. And you still have a team. So one of my complaints about the way that these things typically go is that the people up front articulate some lofty principle, and everybody says right and writes it down, and it doesn't stick. So I think we learn from stories. So tell us a story of a growing pain that you went through. I know there wasn't more than one, maybe 2, but tell us a story about a growing pain you went through, and tell us the role that your team played in helping you get through the growing pains.
Well, so when I first joined the team, I started with looking at the business opportunity, the markets, the customers. Who should I be talking to sell a grandiose platform technology? And the technology is, as I mentioned earlier, it's advanced materials. It's bio-inspired catalytic material, and it's nanostructured, super, super cool, beautiful to look at. But we had a lot of difficulty in identifying specifically the application area. And it's not because problems don't exist in industry. It's, so for example, to be more specific, we were looking at the typical users of catalysts. You have the chemical industry, you have catalytic converters for automotives, for example. But those industries are very mature, and there's a tendency to be slow in adopting new technologies, even if there are certain problems to be solved. And so we did run into some issues in defining what that first application should be and could get us to market quickly. So it's not that the profit margin might not exist, it's not that the market may not exist. It was because as a startup, we had to figure out how to get to market really quickly and start making revenue as well. And so there were a lot of different parameters. And over time, we decided to focus on indoor air quality because catalysts are great for treating different air streams. And we realized that there was an issue with indoor air as well as outdoor air. It wasn't enough, actually, to just have a cool material. That was the other growing pain. And even though I had worked for a long time with tough tech companies, it was still really difficult to come to that conclusion that we actually had to build a whole hardware system with software to convince the market that this is something very game-changing. And so we launched into building our own air purification system. And then that led to some shifts in our technology over time. And so there were lots of pivots over time in terms of, what is the real problem we can solve in a relatively short amount of time, and how can we bring our core competencies to bear to solve those problems.
And did you have any internal disagreements within your team while you were sorting through all of this?
I think that's one of the cool things about our team is that we've been very upfront with each other over time and discussing some of the issues that would come up, and then to come to agreement on what we should do to solve those problems. Yeah, it was not easy, but once we came to a common conclusion, we acted and made a decision to move forward without really looking back. So that's part of the founder chemistry as well.
Have any of you in the audience ever worked in an organization where the spirit was not fully collaborative? Raise your hand. Okay. Well then, Sissi, we have to ask you an obvious question, which is you appear to have fostered a corporate culture that supports collaboration in the face of disagreement. How'd you do it?
Well, we have arguments, of course.
Never. That's hard to believe.
You don't shy away from conflict, I don't. You have to be kind of honest with yourself that there might be a problem.
So it doesn't mean you just roll over.
No. I don't think that would ever work.
All right, Sebastien?
And so a couple points. On this one, also, I think when your team is, the culture that you impart to your team earlier matters because it will stay, those habits stay as you hire more people and grow, and the people you hire will behave the way you behave with them, with the people they hire, and so on. So the early stage are critical. I think we had a collaborative, we have a collaborative team. I think, to be fair, it's also easier when your team is small, right? We're still both in the 20-ish people company, where you still know everyone. The second you go, at more than 40 people, physically you can have different department. What was tricky for us is we started right with COVID, and obviously you couldn't fly, you couldn't move. There was a lot of physical limitations. So we built a team that's 1/3 or half remote. Some people remote in the US, some people remote, on the other side of, in France, in Morocco, in Brazil, in everywhere. And keeping, a tight team through Zoom brings some challenges. But it's been working really well. I think there were actually a lot of pro overall. I think relatively COVID was a pro for younger company that were able to adapt to it very quickly versus big company that had many processes, had to change everything. On what Sissi said earlier, I think it's very common to solve a technical problem. It's relatively easy. If you have a PhD in a specific field, you're better than whoever is already in that field, or whatever is the standard practice. That doesn't mean you're solving a problem that is relevant in terms of business. You mentioned a corporation that are not necessarily collaborative. When you're trying to sell to a big company, maybe it's not going to happen because your product is designed for one department but has to be purchased by a different department. Or there's a lot of non-engineering, non-scientific reason why a product can be technically good but a business failure. And if you started the company with a scientific product, that's what basically you have to figure out, how to align those things. And that can be tricky if you haven't worked in the industry before or don't have a team that has worked. And that's usually the first year or two of the company to align your technical problem with a problem that would make your business successful.
Well, I found that the bit of time that I spent here left me somewhere between ill-prepared and counter-prepared for life in a Fortune 500 company, because I was used to merit triumphing. If you were the first person to figure out the square root of -1, then you rule the day. Whereas I found myself in a lot of meetings where the topics were what should be the best way to take business from our competitor, what's the right price for this new product, things where the answers had some ambivalence. And what seemed to happen over and over again was the person who pounded on the table and spoke the loudest won the argument. And so, I know you've never seen that. So I salute you both for putting together cultures where the goal is getting to the right answer as a team rather than being right as a person. That's not a subtle distinction. It's very important. So before I pester them with follow-on questions, do you guys have any questions you want to ask them about this topic? Yes. Awesome jacket, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
There are a couple of motorcyclists up here. You better turn her mic on. Ping does this to people she doesn't like.
I think. Let's see.
Okay. So I have a question. How long does it take for your team to come to agreement to pivot, especially the first change? And how many hours? Because you want to be an efficient team, right? You wanted to make decisions fast so that you don't miss the opportunity.
I think it depends on the magnitude of the decision. If you're talking about making a dramatic product pivot, that takes some time, and you have to really think through all the pros and cons. And I'm very data-driven, so I like to do the analysis before I make such a decision. On certain smaller decisions, like we have at least once a day, we have technical meetings to discuss the results from our technical side. And decisions can be made on the fly. We have Scrum meetings every single morning. And some decisions come out of those as well, just based on how the team is working and what the new data shows. So it can be very fast, or it depends on the situation. If it's we also have weekly meetings where we talk about a little bit more broadly across different topics on the product side and decide what to do in the following week. So there are times when you want to make very quick decisions, and then there are some really tough business decisions that took really long time to come to a really convincing conclusion on. And I don't try to rush those because they have a lot of business implications, cost implications, contractual implications, and those are not taken lightly. And it just takes some time to figure out. And but I think once we make a decision, we go forward. And I've been in organizations in the past where teams would make decisions and then there would be a lot of second guessing. And I think that's a leadership failure where you essentially didn't get everybody the right amount of feedback and take that into consideration such that you have now reached a conclusion and you've convinced the right people that this is the right decision to take. And so when you do that, you can have a lot of pushback from your team in different ways that are very negative. And so it really depends on the situation, is my answer.
Sebastien, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, we didn't pivot. So our kind of initial idea is what we're still executing today. What has worked really well for for me, is to have a lot of one-on-one discussion with people, kind of after hour when no one's in the office, and when people are just in a different, more relaxed, more open-minded. It's a different context, not. And then you get really the real feedback from people, what they think about your ideas, what you think about theirs, the direction they think you should go if they're your co-founder, for example, if they're your employee, what they enjoy in the workspace, what they don't, and that has kept I think the team very united. Kind of all those. We implemented a culture. I think it's partially because we're from a different country, but we all had a lunch together, team lunch, every day at 12 or 12:30. Everyone goes on the same table, and that's a French thing, and that worked really well because it's very easy. I mean, it's what you do here. Mostly, if you're a grad student, you just eat in front of your computer, and so that gives time for people to relax a little bit and talk more openly. Yeah, so there's no right or wrong. It's just a different style, different tweaks.
Yeah.
Related to this, in your two companies, does everyone report to you, or have you created layers of management? The reason I ask is there is a management cliche that the maximum span of control should be 7 people. And yet each of you has more than that in your company. So do you have a flat org chart where it's the boss and everybody else, or do you have a couple of layers?
Well,
I'll start with you, Sebastien.
just on this one, because it's we actually had this discussion with one of my co-founder, and I wanted to have a flat organization. He wanted to have, he's in head of whatever, data science, so data scientists talk to him, and I'm in charge of manufacturing, so those, engineers talk to me. And I didn't want this, and it was a tense discussion because he felt like I was probably stepping on his toes a little bit. I think my personal view is, as a CEO, I should be able to talk to anyone, irrelevant of their position. But you have to watch out. That doesn't mean you have to short circuit whoever they report to. It's a fine line. I think you can do both. I still, talk to everyone. Obviously, I talk to the people I'm in charge more often than to the people that I'm not in charge of. But yeah, it's a short answer is we do both.
But formally, if I were to walk around your company and talk to each of your employees and say, who's your boss? Would all of them say Sebastien, or would all of them say, well, I report to so-and-so who reports to Sebastien?
Probably so-and-so who reports to Sebastien.
Okay, Sissi?
The latter. As I mentioned, we don't have a really large full-time employee team. I lean very heavily on consultants and contractors. And so our contract engineering has its own organization. And I depend on my direct communication with the team, and especially the program manager there, to make sure that our projects are on time, on track. But yeah, I feel that my team is very flat for the most part, but the day-to-day certain activities on the materials development, that's what we keep core to the business, and other things we outsource. So the core competency, I do lean on my co-founders to make sure that the science is right. But like I said, we meet very, very often to make sure that the data is telling us something that we were expecting, and if it doesn't, then we switch very quickly to think about why not and how do we go to the next step. So it's very collaborative. It's very multidisciplinary.
I think it's kind of a rite of passage when you hand over the reins to other people and insist that they manage some of their staff. And I was abruptly at one point thrust into a situation where I'd moved out of startups. After my third startup, I took a break from entrepreneurship because I thought having a staff would be kind of a novelty. And I took over this company that badly needed to be turned around, and suddenly I had 250 employees. And that's a lot to have reporting to one person. So I had staff. I had VPs of this and VPs of that, and some of them were crap. Yes, ma'am? You're going to ask them a question. Well, I'm telling a story. No. Wait one moment. Anyway, I think it's kind of a rite of passage when you have to hand over the reins. And it can slow things down. So in the early days when you want to stay young and nimble, having as flat an organization as possible, I think facilitates that. Okay, I'm done. What's your question?
Thank you. So this is for Sebastien. I assume because you're a CEO, you're in more of a business-oriented position. So I guess why did you make that pivot, and how did you feel that you were a good fit or that you had the qualifications, given that you did so much schooling and you were very technical before?
Yeah, so your assumption isn't completely true. It's a transition. Like the first week, you're basically still a 100% engineer, and the more time flies, the more the company grows, the less engineer you are, and the more the business role you have. But sometimes you have to alternate. I think it's really it swings a lot. So there's a concept of technical debt. So you can take some, for example, if you're fundraising, you're busy doing this, or you're doing a lot less of engineering, that you have to catch up at some point. Even if you want to hire people, it's going to take you time to train them anyways, which is engineering job. Basically, you're going to explain to them whatever science field you were doing before. So now I would say today it's probably 50-50. It's still 50% engineering. And again, it boils down for me to recruiting, finding the right people to replace you. Like you know you should be replaced, you know you should be doing other stuff. For example, we just hired our first sales team, our first sales employee, first member of our sales team. And so I spend a lot of time with him to onboard him. And as I do that, I spend a lot less time doing engineering. So long story short, it's a transition. I don't think it's practical to do it very brutally. One way to go around this is going back to the number of co-founders, is we built a team that had people, if I cliche a little bit the background of each of us, we had a math guy, a computer science guy, a business guy, a physics engineering guy, pretty much. So each one was in charge of a specific domain. There's obviously a lot of overlap when the team is small, but the bigger the team is, the less overlap you have. And the more your early team will do more and more business effectively. Even your initial scientific people, they will be in charge of other scientists that report to them, so you do more HR tasks.
Are you trying to fully pivot to business, or is it just that you haven't found a person for that role and you're trying to stay on the technical side?
I'm trying to do the necessary amount of engineering. So some stuff no one can do but me today, so there's no option, or can do by my standards. Other stuff, sometimes it's also, I think, a negative trait of a lot of engineers, at least the ones that I know, that they spend a lot of time doing things they like and not necessarily things they should. So that's I try to do a lot of self-control on this, because I could spend, whole day doing some scientific pet project that is completely useless for the company. So I think that's difficult. But yeah, I don't know if I fully answered the question, but it's.
Let me add a couple things there. The first is that I think, I think that I put a lot of emphasis on project management because I have a background in project management in tech. And I think that most engineers do not have that background. And so it takes some discipline. It actually teaches a lot of great skills to think about how to keep projects on track. On the other hand, startups need to be really nimble and agile. And so, how do you merge multiple disciplines of project management together to adapt to the culture of where you are? And that changes over time. When you're very early, it's one type of project management. As you grow, you start to do a lot more long-term planning and combine that with the day-to-day. To Sebastian's point, I do find that I've worked with scientists and engineers from so many different walks of, or like backgrounds, from bio all the way to materials and mechanical engineering and such. So there's a tendency to get very attracted to the shiny new idea and to start doing that instead. But to be disciplined and keeping focus is really important for a startup. On the other hand, I really also subscribe to the idea that you need to allow for some of that creative juice. And so allowing people to have that 10% of freedom to come up with new ideas has been really important to our pivots. Sometimes when we got hit a really dead end in our product, it's those new ideas that were, kind of simmering in the background that came out to be like the shining star. And so I think it's I don't know. I guess it's being very adaptable and
It's a healthy balance.
Yeah, it's striking that balance is not
between
easy.
some random wild card, probably going to fail activities, and a relentless focus on the deadlines to get the essential stuff done. It's very hard to do.
Yep.
You have a question. Did you get your questions answered? Okay.
Yeah, and actually this is a related question to Sebastian. Could you talk a little bit about initial split of titles? So one of your other three co-founders was a business person, did I get that right? Mm-hmm. So why you got to be the CEO, and how was that conversation with the business person?
Yeah.
Because we're just so used to like the scientist being the CTO or CSO.
Which I hate that, by the way, to be clear.
Right, and that actually brings me to the second question. As a scientist or like engineer, what was your motivation to be the CEO?
Okay, there's a lot of things there.
Well, that was a cluster of questions. Now, just pick one.
I took like all the MIT entrepreneurship class I could, on this side of the campus, on the Sloan side of the campus. And there's always the kind of cliche, you're the nerd, you're going to be CTO, and I'm the one who wants to make money, so I'm going to be CEO. The MBA, kind of some formulation of this.
That might be an oversimplification, Sebastian. I'm sorry, go ahead.
20%,
Yeah.
at least when you're still on the campus stage, obviously after things change. And I think one of the reason is that a lot of engineers also are, don't enjoy doing not engineering, so that's fine. They want to stay in their field. In our case, it was a little different. The business background person is our CFO, effectively. We have, CTO, CEO, CFO, CEO, the different position. It wasn't too much of a problem. We each had, the company started with kind of my PhD, which I've been working for many years on before. So I had, let's say, a head start relatively to the other members who were pretty new. So that kind of brings a little bit of authority early on as people kind of catch up to your, what you know on the field, which should be more than them if you've been working on it for many years. That doesn't mean you should be CEO. Don't get me wrong. That's not my point. But it's I don't think it should be automatic that if you're the engineer, you shouldn't be the CEO, or if you're the business person, you should be the CEO. I think in day-to-day, early stage titles are very artificial. It matters a lot more once you're at the seed stage and later on. Early stage, everyone works on everything, and you have to be very mobile and agile. So yeah, there was no strong discussion on that in our case. Not everyone joined the team at the same time too, so it's a little different. The early stage discussion really were more around equity distribution, more than titles. Some people care about their titles, some people don't. That's a personal thing. Yeah.
One of the things that venture mentoring service requires, however, if you come see that organization, is that you have a founder's agreement in place before they will talk to you, because everybody is quite generous and open-spirited when the startup is broke. One day there's $10 million on the table, and then exactly who gets how much for doing what starts to become relevant. So the founder's agreement becomes essential in those matters. Maybe one more question, and then I want to move on. And
I want to
believe-
make sure we have time for a Zoom question that was posed a little earlier.
Oh,
Yeah,
all
so
right.
as an
Well, let's
extension
take one from this gentleman, and then you have one from.
from Zoom.
Okay. You first.
Thank you, guys. My question is about early stage recruitment. How do you bring people on board when you don't necessarily have a lot of money? Could you talk a bit about how that worked for you? Thanks.
I'll just tell you what happened to us early on. We created the company about a year before we fundraised, something like that. Maybe there was a few small angels early on, but the real meaningful amount of money came a year later. And there was, I don't think there's a recipe at that point. It's really about convincing people to gamble and make a bet on you and your idea. I don't think you can put as much reasoning as you want behind it earlier. This is it. Different people have different positions. Some people worked at bigger company. They already have a decent amount of money in the bank. They can kind of afford that risk. Other people's were students, and usually they much less. So there's different viewpoint that boils down to also the equity distribution, right? How much risk each person is taking and so on. That's also why in our case, people joined at different stage in the company. Effectively, like some people will join after, they change their job. Some people will resign from their job and join you early on. We created the company while we were mostly all, let's say, two of us were still in the MIT ecosystem, so researcher, postdocs, and the other two were in the private sector. It boils down to negotiation skills with people.
So I think early stage, you have a lot of different options on how you go about getting the human resources you need. One of the things that we did a lot of was hiring interns because it was inexpensive. They could do discrete projects because, again, early stage, we're making a lot of pivots all the time. And coming up with some discrete bounded projects were not such a big deal. And we could take on the risk of having a little bit more mentoring of interns to get projects done. Another important element, I think, in recruiting for us in general is aligning the motivation and mission of the organization with who you're trying to hire. And so for us, we actually converted to a public benefit corporation about a year ago because we are in the business to not just generate profit, but also do some good. And so we're very sustainability oriented, where we care about what we do. We're very mindful of how we do it as well. And so, finding resonance in candidates with that message, I think it's actually a lot easier nowadays. I think when I first started my career, I was idealistic and nobody cared about what I cared about. Nowadays, it's so refreshing to see many of you probably sitting here who really want to do a startup because you want to make an impact. And it's easier to make that alignment when your organization has that mission statement and you talk about it. You walk that path. And so that is one of the values. Another is that as a startup, you have certain qualities that people might be looking for, and you lean in on those particular value points as well. For example, you can make a huge difference in a startup. You can't do that in a large corporation. You can learn a ton, and your job may change a lot, but you learn a ton, and maybe somebody is interested in doing a startup of their own in the future. So you sell on. It's like any type of business or any type of product you're trying to sell. Your company, you can think of it as a product as well, right? To a candidate. And so come up with those reasons for why somebody should join you and really lean in on those particular characteristics. So,
I'd like to weigh in on this topic as well, but mostly to amplify what you two guys have already said. I've hired a fair number of people that I could not afford. And one way was via interns. I found that they had a lot of potential, but they required clear understanding of the ground rules. There was one year, for example, when I took 4 Harvard Business School students in as interns, and they were all male. And so I said, gentlemen, here's the deal. If you ride this train with me, you're going to have an experience over this semester that you will otherwise have to wait 4 or 5 years to have, because we're going to identify a market, we're going to create a product, we're going to go through the focus groups, we're going to define the market positioning, and we're going to make a prototype, all by May. However, like you, I did some time in business school, and I know how to make PowerPoint presentations that are all bullshit, no substance. Bring me those, and I will throw you out. So I'm serious as a heart attack about this. Don't screw around. This will be a great opportunity. And by the way, if there's a time when one of you can't make a session and the other 3 can, I'm going to regard you as a compound brain. Your job is to learn from each other. So I laid out some ground rules. And that turned out, and I repeated that a couple times with Sloan MBA candidates as well, worked quite well. The other, and this is something that could easily be blown over, but should not be, is if you really talk to people and ask them, what do you want from the work that you do? If you spend a minute or two, or more accurately, listen for a minute or two, money usually falls down the list. This gets to the heart of your question, sir. Right? A lot of times, the people that you want to work with, well, let me rephrase that because you have your own opinions. The people I want to work with in startups want to make a difference. They would like in some small way to leave the world a little better off for their presence. And what I found to be quite effective was, look, if you're looking for a place where you can work, where what you do doesn't really matter, you can come in and shuffle stuff from one side of your desk to the other side of the desk, go to meetings where everybody gets airtime but nobody gets anything done. It's not for you. If you want a place where what you do matters, meaning the good that you do will have a favorable impact and the bad that you do will have a negative impact, this is the place for you. There's no place to hide. I can give you a lot of great experience. I might be able to throw you some equity under the right circumstances. I can promise you meaningful work. And a surprising number of people have said, that's actually more, I will take a cut and pay for that. And we say, well, I'm not looking for starvation and terrible wages forever. There's some upside. If we grow this company, obviously you will get a bite of the apple, fair is fair, et cetera. But coming in the door, we can't afford to pay you what you could command in the market. We can give you a lot of things that count in my world as compensation, but it's not money.
And just to add something on top, early on, I think one of the difficulty is finding those people, because creating a startup, I think nowadays it's sexy, it's cool, it's trendy, right? And so you get a lot of people who are considering this, but in reality, it's not for them. And so that you can waste a lot of time when you're trying to create a team to really figure out who is willing to take, figuratively those pay cuts in exchange of those other benefits, who will be a good fit. And that takes time, and that's a real difficult part.
Okay, one question from Zoom, and then I have a new topic for us.
Great, thank you. So I think this is a good extension off some of the broader discussion that we're having here, but Karina from Zoom is asking, in terms of decision-making, are you making decisions unanimously, or is there a percentage threshold with which you're making decisions?
it's not democratic.
What was the question again? Are you what?
Are decisions made unanimously or with some kind of a percentage basis, like a threshold?
It's not a democracy, right? It's not who votes this, who votes that, but at the same time, it's you have to make sure. I'm assuming it's going to be a high-up decision, right? So something meaningful in the company. It's between the co-founder or the C-suite people that are talking to each other in the room. you just weigh the pros and cons, and you know, at the end, if it's a tie, you make the cut if you're the CEO. But you just have to be very aware of what's the risk of every decision. Early on, as long as you know exactly kind of the pros and cons, you can usually bounce back pretty quickly if it's not the correct choice. But everyone has to agree on like what are the pros, what are the cons, what's the risk, what's the you know, the different weights in there.
I think oftentimes making a decision is better than not making one. And so, you know, compared to inaction, right? That you're making a decision not to act, and that's still a decision. And so sometimes if the team is not able to come to a consensus, you, as CEO, I still have to make a decision, and we go forward. We try it out. We allow for potential failure, but we hopefully fail very quickly and very inexpensively, and evaluate the results, and then make the next decision. So yeah, that's how I see it.
I read somewhere, some fellow said that he thought that civilization's greatest accomplishment was the implementation of the deadline, because without it, nothing gets done. And sometimes you say, well, we haven't reached the consensus, we've hit the deadline. It's my job as the CEO to do the tie-breaking vote, and if I'm wrong, we'll fix it.
Right.
But let's do it and move on. Okay, we've used the word team more than a few times, and there's this romantic vision of the entrepreneur as the lonely visionary. I'm not sure it's true. So how many of you guys in the audience have ever hired anybody? Oh, a fair number of you, okay. How many of you in the audience have ever fired anybody? Fewer, but still substantive. That would suggest that you've made some perhaps good hires and perhaps some bad hires. So let me ask the panel, might you have any stories, if you don't, I do, of when you have made good hires and what wonderful things happened, and when you made bad hires and what dreadful things occurred?
So I'll start with the good. Again, with COVID, remote team and all, I think we're very lucky. We have what, you know, it's called a 10Xer, like someone that is like literally will do the work compared than 10 normal engineers in this case. But at least in my, you know, small experience, what I've seen is usually those people are a little different. They don't just report to you, do their task. They work on their own schedule in their own fashion. And it's been a very difficult, I think, but very rewarding journey, for example, to work with that specific programmer in this case, because he does the work of, you know, like it would be impossible to replace. Like you would have to go hire the best engineers in Silicon Valley, and it's nothing startup, you know, you can't afford it. But the trade-offs are you have to learn how they like to work and what they like, you know, work at night or during the day, in this case at night. How do you control them? Basically, they're an asset and you have to know how to use them. They can't report to you like a normal engineer. And so we had to really adapt we made the decision basically to adapt our company process for that specific person because it was worth it in this case. So that was a very good hire, but a little exotic, I'd say. On the bad side of things, we had contractors that didn't work out. What we've had to you know, stop the contract there. We were able, I think, to train differently the people we're considering laying off, kind of adjust their position, and that has worked really well so far. We were considering laying off people. We have been able to avoid it. You know, I'm sure at some point, at given scale, we wouldn't be able to avoid, but I try really hard personally to avoid it as much as possible. And the real way to do that is just to be more selective on the hiring side of things. You know, if you've determined that that person is, you know, they're basically smart enough or technically savvy enough in whatever field, that they're potentially a good fit in the team, you know, you like their personality and they'll blend in. Then if things don't work out, I think there's a lot of leeway to adjust and place them somewhere else in the company where they will work.
So I think that hiring is one of the toughest things to do. That's the starting point. I've tried to figure out ways to figure out how to try out people before we actually make that hire, because it is very costly to onboard and very costly to lay off or fire someone. And that process of hiring is costly as well, because you're spending time, you're recruiting. It's just a really expensive thing to do. So making that hiring decision is super important. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why you want to be flexible to somebody's work schedule sometimes. You know, if that person is truly valuable, you adapt. And there are some personal issues that may come up with your employees, and you have to be conscious of that and work with them and you know, help them adapt to the situation too. And that's being sensitive to the fact that they're human. And so ultimately, I just think it's a very expensive element of doing business. And so I try to be super, super careful. And another reason why I like to try to have consultants and contractors for tactical matter. But ultimately, yeah, I've made a lot of mistakes in my hiring past. And in one case, in one of the companies, I was kind of desperate to find somebody with the right resume and to take over certain aspects of a project, and hire this person, came with all the right experiences, all the right educational background, but ultimately didn't pan out. Yeah, there were some character issues. I think Bob wanted to talk about that. I don't want to give that away, but that's a really important element. You know, you need to be able to trust that person. Another is, you know, work ethic is part of that character. And also, just because somebody has a certain type of background and, you know, industry background doesn't mean it's a really good fit with your particular research area or the team dynamics. And so I've had to let people go in those situations, and it was not an easy conversation at all. And I take full responsibility for those poor hires and learn from the experience of what went wrong with the hiring and try not to repeat that mistake.
I have an anecdote, and I want the audience to tell me how I should have handled the situation. But first, the ultimate filter that I look through in evaluating employees is we're here to get stuff done. Are they helping us get stuff done, or are they impeding our ability to get stuff done? And sometimes if they're impeding our ability to get stuff done, it's because they don't know what they need to know. Sometimes it's because, and forgive me if this sounds deprecating, but they don't know how to play well with others. And so they're disruptive, they're not collaborative, as you were talking about, and they're just kind of a pain in the ass. Everybody avoids them, nobody wants to work with them, they impede our ability to get stuff done. My anecdote, you guys will recall last night that I told you a story about building the company that sold the product for people with diabetes. And at one point, we had gotten up to, I don't know, 25 employees, and we had customer service people who would answer the phone, and we had a fair staff, a bit of infrastructure. And one of the people who had just done a first-rate job at all the stuff she'd been doing, but it was kind of low level, asked if she could assume more responsibilities and maybe a step up in pay. And I liked her, I trusted her, and I said, actually, I need somebody to take on the administrative responsibilities for payroll. And if you would be willing to, and there's some work associated with this, if you'd be willing to take that on, then we'll give you a slight elevation in title and a bump in pay. And she said, she was thrilled. I love it, wonderful. 2 weeks later, she was looking at who was making how much and promptly told two of her girlfriends within the company what everybody's salary was. So let me ask you, what should I have done in that situation? I'll tell you what I did do after you tell me what I should have done, because they're probably not the same. So if you were in that situation, I was in that situation, what should I have done? Yes?
Just a guess. Just a guess. I mean, if it's not like lower her position immediately, or actually, no, maybe keep her position, but teach her how to communicate and then really talk to her and understand why she did this, and then talk to any other people who have, like talked one-on-one with all the other people who she have told their like salary is, and just understand.
Okay, so to summarize, I should forgive her and educate her.
Not completely forgive, understand why she did this and what is her personality, and then decide.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, maybe take that responsibility back from her and, make her do what she was doing previously.
Okay. Demote her, in other words, and relieve her of this responsibility. You guys remember at the beginning of this session, I asked you to move up front and said it was really hard to deal with people who were, go ahead, but talk loud.
Wei, you can use the microphone there as well if you prefer.
Oh yeah, okay.
We have quite a few.
Yeah, your penalty is you got to do a little sprint.
I think I would first understand from her if she knows that it's not appropriate for her for her role to do that. And if she's aware, I'd like to understand why she's doing it. But another day, I think I would remove her from that position as a warning to everyone else that this is not tolerated in the firm.
Okay. So, I left a couple of things out. I'm sorry. This was an oversight. When I offered her this responsibility, I explained to her the requirements of confidentiality. I should have told you that. I'm sorry. I also observed that she and her two girlfriends promptly took up griping furiously about the people in the company who were making more than they were making. Oh my God, I work harder than he does. I work harder than she does. I'm more valuable than she is, and they're making more money than I am. Grumble, grumble, grumble. So this is one of the very few times, there's only been one other time in my career when I abruptly and preemptively fired people and threw them out. I said, I'm sorry, it's hard to do this, but you have pissed me off. This is completely unforgivable. It's inexcusable. I'm not putting up with it. You've got 1 hour to get out of here. And if you need help carrying that box full of stuff out, I'll help you, but you're out of here. And by the way, if you tell anybody that you want a reference from me, don't do that. So, to me, this was crossing a line. Might have been the wrong decision, I don't know. But I can tell you that the disruption they were causing was greater than the disruption that their absence caused. And so I made the hard-nosed decision that the lesser pain would be to replace them. And out they went. So, bad hire? Probably.
Did you replace all three?
Yes, I did. All three. It wasn't hard because at that point we were cooking as a company and people were kind of interested in getting on board. Yes, ma'am. You know, I should have checked that before I had my temper tantrum, but I didn't, and there weren't, because what they did was a clear violation of professional ethics and a clear violation despite the fact that I had explained to them. They could have challenged it, but it would not have stood, in my opinion, because again, it's a violation of professional, well, this is less true these days. People are more open about talking about how much they're making. At the time, it was considered completely confidential, stuff you just did not violate. So I had a temper tantrum and threw them out. Yes. I do know what you mean. Did you guys hear the question? Okay. Well, you did fine. You guys are the panel. Will you allow me one more anecdote?
Of course.
I hired a head of sales with this larger organization that I was with. And there were some specific things that he needed to be able to get done. And he got all of them done. And he did a first-rate job. But he seemed to have meetings in his office all the time with the door closed. And the word got out that if you were not one of the people in the office with him at the time, you were getting stabbed in the back. And since the cast of people that were in the office with the door closed rotated, everybody who was outside the office knew what was going on in the office and felt pain in the back. And furthermore, he would badmouth me and he would badmouth the board of directors when we weren't around. And I was trying to turn a company around. Company had lost money for a lot of years. It had the best products in the industry. There's absolutely no reason why it should be losing money other than staffing deficiencies. And it was part of my mission to have everybody pulling the rope in the same direction. So let me ask you, what should I have done? Well, that was my conclusion. I essentially said, I'm sorry that you have made up your mind you don't want to work here anymore. I'm sure you will be successful somewhere, but you're not going to be successful here. Bye. Okay, one more anecdote. I'm sorry. It was budget time. What?
How many people have you fired in your entire career?
About 100. About 100.
About 100?
Yeah, don't let my mild-mannered demeanor deceive you. It was budget time, and that's a point when everybody who's involved with the finances tends to put in a little extra time. So it was a Saturday, and there were 14 or 15 people from the accounting staff all working in the office. One of the guys had some anger management issues, and at one point he got frustrated, stood up, and said, I'm just going to kill every one of you. Now, mind you, people who make their living as accountants are not usually bold and abrasive. They tend to be a little on the meek side. So in that situation, when I learned about this on Monday, what should I have done? You've already talked. If nobody else volunteers, I'll call on you. Yes? Oh, that's a better answer than what I did. Did you guys hear that? Yes? Okay. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
Before firing you, I would make apologies.
All right, I should have consulted with all of you guys. Well, I called him into my office. You guys know, of course, I'm a working musician, and there was a blues jam that would happen in Acton, not terribly far from where our office was. And I would show up from time to time with a guitar over my shoulder and play the blues all night long. Be a little sleepy Friday morning, but hey. And he was a harmonica player, a blues harp player. So we'd actually played music together. I mean, I like the guy. And his anger management issues didn't bother me, so, right? So, but I called him in the office. And I said, Jim, you're going to stay on the payroll for 4 more weeks, but you can't come to the office. Because what you have done is terrify an entire staff of people. And you've come close to this a few times before, and I've talked to you about this. And I regard it as like having a pebble in your shoe. It's not all that obviously a problem, but you're never going to sprint when you have a pebble in your shoe. And I have asked you more than a few times to get the pebble out of your shoe, and you haven't. And I can't wait any longer. So I hope you'll regard this firing as a wake-up call, because you got to fix this. You can't work here anymore. I'm going to keep you on the payroll for 4 weeks. I want you to stay at home. I want you to be available as a consultant along those 4 weeks, so that if there's transitional stuff that we need your help for, so your continuation of your payroll is contingent on a couple of things. Don't steal the company documents, don't badmouth us in the marketplace, don't sue us. I mean, I prepared this, there was a list. And out he went. And I said, I'm going to call the whole staff into my office so that you have some privacy while you empty your desk in the company of our head of HR, who will make sure that you don't also walk out with, the beer in the fridge or whatever. And I explained to everybody that he was leaving us to pursue other interests. He would be available for 4 weeks. And there was this huge sigh of relief. So a question, how would my employees have looked at me if I had let him get away with this? Well, 2 words occur to me: weak and ineffective. And I would like to think of myself as neither. I have a fiduciary obligation to the employees to help us get stuff done. So he had to go. Not always an easy decision, but the right decision. And from an analytic perspective, it was simple. Agreed? Okay, new topic. Oh my goodness, it's time. Well, all right. Can I have your permission to go about 3-4 minutes overtime? All right, there's something that I prepared in advance that may be helpful, which was, I have learned from my bad hires to have sort of a system in place. It's kind of a hiring funnel. My intent was, if I just pour people in the top of the funnel and impose some filters, the right ones will come out the bottom. It's an oversimplification, but I think the first filter, and Sebastien and Sissi, both of you mentioned this right away. Do they have the chops? They have the knowledge to know how to do the job. And that's usually relatively easy to smoke out. And if they don't, that's the first cut. They're out. The next filter is, do they actually give a damn whether or not your company succeeds? Right? If they're always interested in being right themselves rather than finding the right answer, they're not going to work. So they're out. The third filter is the hardest one, but I think it's the most important, and you used that word, which was character. This is hard to analyze, but incredibly important. Are they honest? Do they own their mistakes? Are they open to change? Are they humble, considerate of others? And in my world anyway, it helps if they have a sense of humor, because this stuff's hard. And if not, out they go. And if they make it through all of those filters, I find there's a high probability that winners will come out the bottom. Okay? Hard experience, may not work for all of you, helps me quite a lot.
Can I add?
Yes, please.
One of the things that I do obviously value is the technical chops. But one of the things that I've also found is that a lot of technical people tend to be very single-threaded. or very deep in their discipline. And what I look for are people who can think outside of the box, and that's easy and cliche to say. And what I mean by that is, can they do very quick, back of the envelope calculations to tell me if something might be feasible? Can they think about applying something outside of their comfort zone to solve a problem? Can they see a problem differently from their traditional discipline? So as an example, if you're a material scientist, can you give me an alternative way of thinking about how to solve a coding problem? And so that's the kind of thing that we have been employing in our hiring process as well for a lot of technical people. We're not just looking at the resume, we're not just looking at how great your dissertation was, but can you actually adapt to a commercially driven type of solution finding development and be more, I guess it's what some people are calling analogical thinking. I don't know.
I like that.
To kind of think from other disciplines, perhaps, something in biology, something in biochemistry, to consider how you might solve a problem. Maybe something in management, how you might come at a particular technical problem. There are so many different ways to think about an issue. And so while I don't have a technical background as a traditional, I don't have an engineering background. I don't have, a science background. But what I bring to the table is the ability to kind of think from one discipline to another to kind of assess whether or not a solution could be potentially successful with a commercial angle. And so I want my team to all kind of develop that skill, because Sebastien mentioned earlier that he's trying to, if somebody is not a great fit in one position, that he's looking for another way to get that person to fit in within the organization. And in that kind of situation, you might want to really leverage a different set of skills that person might have. So I really love the fact that Bob is a musician and has a lot of different interests, doesn't have, I don't have a deep science background, as I already mentioned. So it's not so simple to say, hey, you have to be a technologist to do a science-based startup.
But a little cross-disciplinary creativity is what I think you're describing.
Yeah, and in our materials development, it's still bio-inspired, it's still nature-inspired, and I because I have a very strong interest in biodiversity and sustainability, I bring that angle to the team that may not be so obvious sometimes. And so there's a lot of value to a cross-disciplinary team, and it's not just I'm saying that, hey, we sit around and eat snacks and talk about what happened this week. Like, we literally actually think about what the results mean for the company and the product.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you guys have been good about participating this evening, and our panel has been terrific. So how about a nice round of applause for Sissi and Sebastien. Joe, to you.
Sounds like you're going to get the job there at the end. Yeah. Thank you very much. We actually have some tokens, don't we? Would you like to present? A little token of appreciation.
All right.
Yay.